From Vermont Public, this is The Frequency. I'm Burgess Brown. It's Tuesday, May 20th, and here are today's headlines. Fewer Vermonters are dying from opioid overdoses. That's according to data from state death certificates. 183 people died from opioid-related overdoses last year, down from a peak of 244 deaths 2 years prior. That's in line with a decrease in overdose deaths across the country, according to data from the Centers for Disease Control. Kelly Dougherty, the deputy commissioner at the Department of Health, says a decade ago, Governor Peter Shumlin declared the opioid epidemic a crisis. At the time, there were less than 100 fatal opioid-related overdoses in the state.
So we're hopefully turning the corner and bending the curve, but it's still a crisis and we still have a ways to go.
She says the proliferation of overdose-reversing medications likely contributed to fewer deaths, along with drug testing resources. A damaging microburst hit White River Junction Saturday and caused flooding in town. At least 31 buildings were damaged and 2 local families displaced. Hartford Fire Chief Scott Cooney says people returning to their homes should call the fire department or insurance company before making repairs. And he says people should make sure their homes are safe before going inside.
In a lot of these instances, power systems are affected in the home that should be checked by a certified electrician or somebody else in fire prevention.
He says the fire warden or fire department can help. Cambridge in Lamoille County and Waitsfield in the Mad River Valley also saw road closures over the weekend. Human-caused climate change is bringing more extreme rain to Vermont, and that can lead to flooding. Franklin County Field Day's 48-year run as one of Vermont's top agricultural fairs is coming to an end, for now at least. The organization's board of directors announced on Facebook this weekend that it's canceling the August event. Abigail Gagne is the marketing director for Franklin County Field Days. She says the state of Vermont will no longer let the organization use its current site at the state airport in Highgate. Gagne says the annual fair was a popular draw for people of all ages.
If you're a teenager or a kid, $15 can get you in. It can get you to go on the rides. You can watch anything. Anything that's going on at the fair, $15. You can't find that anywhere else.
Organizers have been unable to find an alternative location for the fair, but Gagne says efforts to find a new piece of land will continue. And anyone who had 11 days in your annual Smuggler's Notch Stuckage pool, please collect your prize. The notch closed around 11 a.m. Monday morning when a tractor-trailer became, you guessed it, stuck. The notorious roadway reopened for the season on May 9th. Traffic control devices were again installed on both the Stowe and Cambridge sides of the mountain road to deter overlength vehicles from attempting the journey to the top. Drivers who get their vehicles stuck in the notch can face a fine up to $2,000, and that fine can be doubled if they get stuck in the notch more than once within a 3-year period. Coming up, how do we manage forests and the human need for wood in the face of climate change? That story after this. Trees are some of the best tools we have to fight climate change. But we humans use wood for a whole host of things that require cutting them down. And here's the catch. When we chop down trees for lumber, much of the climate-warming carbon they've been storing, it gets released back into the atmosphere very quickly. So what are humans, and especially Vermonters, to do? On the latest episode of Brave Little State, reporter Abigail Giles tracked down the experts to get some answers.
This question about the impact of logging on the environment and what to do about it, it's the kind of thing where if you ask 3 different scientists, you'll get 3 different answers.
Hi, I'm Bill Keaton. I'm a professor of forest ecology and forestry at the Rubenstein School of Environment and Natural Resources at UVM.
Bill is the forest carbon guy in this neck of the woods. And when it comes to carbon, there are 2 big ways forests fight climate change. That's carbon sequestration and carbon storage.
Both are very important. So sequestration refers to carbon uptake.
Basically, as a tree grows and photosynthesizes, it takes carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. Then it uses that carbon to make its wood and bark and leaves and roots and the soil around it.
Sequestration, the uptake, is really only one part of the equation. The other part is how much carbon is stored in vegetation, in the soils.
Scientists call this carbon storage. The carbon that a tree sequesters stays trapped inside for as long as it lives, and a portion of it can persist for decades in the forest long after it dies, in downed trees and soil. As forests age and become more complex, the amount of carbon they store grows.
We need to think of that storage as basically a reservoir of carbon that is kept in vegetation and is not in the atmosphere as a greenhouse gas. It's the benefit that a forest is providing to us by having already sequestered carbon for a couple of centuries, maybe.
Older forests store the most carbon, but Bill says research shows that younger forests actually take carbon out of the atmosphere the fastest.
There's a trade-off between wanting some forests that are younger and growing rapidly and sequestering carbon at a high rate, and wanting also older forests that are storing a lot of carbon in their biomass.
Because of past logging, we have very few of these carbon-rich old forests left in New England. And Bill says we would do well to protect every acre we have left. But there are many different approaches to forest management. Timber harvests, protecting places as forever wild, restoration work.
I'm not an advocate for any one approach.
Yes.
My view is that we need all of these, and we need what I would call a portfolio of forest carbon options. And each one offers different benefits, each one carries different risks.
But making the decision about how to manage a given patch of land, a given forest, this is where the science begins to end and our values start to show up.
It's really hard to talk about it, without the values piece on top of it.
That's Tony D'Amato, also a forestry professor at UVM.
Forests almost are inherently complicated because of all the values that we get from them, and so much of it does intersect with us as who we are as humans.
Tony studies forests that face a lot of logging pressure, and he looks for ways to do that logging so that it will help forests adapt to climate change and absorb more carbon. He believes we need to harvest wood, maybe even more of it than we do now, and do more of that harvesting here in Vermont, where we can regulate it well and make sure it's being done sustainably.
If that wood is harvested in Vermont and then processed in Vermont and then ultimately sold to you in the store in Vermont, that wood from the stump to the mill, to the store, like there's a lot less fuel being expended to, get that to you as a consumer.
Tony points out that right now, about 70% of New England's demand for wood is met by northern Maine, from large swaths of land owned by big companies or investment firms that are beholden to a bottom line. And this is true even though Vermont actually produces more wood than Vermonters consume. We just end up exporting a lot of it.
We just don't own our consumerism. We don't own our impact.
Tony argues that from a carbon perspective, Vermont saving all the trees it can while consuming wood from elsewhere has limited benefit. But that's not the view of every scientist.
It's a pretty complex issue. There's a lot of factors.
Richard Birdsey is an author of 2 reports by the International Panel on Climate Change. He's also a PhD forester and former Forest Service employee. He tends to feel that unless we humans absolutely have to, we should walk away and let forests grow old on their own, without intervention.
If society wants to address the climate crisis, then forests should be left to grow in areas where they're not excessively threatened by disturbances like wildfire or insect epidemics. That's the best approach over the next 2 decades. All the data points to, back to your very original question, is logging bad for climate? Well, it certainly doesn't help.
That was an excerpt from a recent episode of Brave Little State, the show that answers your questions about Vermont. To hear the full episode, follow Brave Little State wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening to The Frequency today. We had additional reporting from Mark Davis, Lexi Krupp, Peter Hirschfeld, and Abigail Giles. Today's episode was produced and edited by Liam Elder Connors, and our music is by Blue Dot Sessions. I'm Burgess Brown. Talk to you tomorrow.
Planet Money helps you understand the economy. We find the people at the center of the story.
Garbage in New York, that was like a controlled substance.
We show you how money influences everything.
Tell me what you like by telling me how you spend your money.
And we dig until we get answers.
I had a bad feeling you were going to bring that up.
Planet Money finds out. All you have to do is listen. The Planet Money Podcast from NPR.